John Deedy, professor of political science at the community colleges of Baltimore County and local political media analyst. Welcome to the Maryland State Politics and Government podcast on Substack. Today, I have on local and national media political analyst and celebrity Kim Klacik. Welcome aboard.
Thank you for having me, John. I'm happy to be here.
Glad to have you here. My first question is, what made you a Republican? What gets people there? Because it's always fascinating. Everyone has their own journey to party and ideology. What got you there?
Yeah, well, I'll say first and foremost, like many Black Americans, I grew up in a household where, everybody thought that we were Democrats. And I have to say, looking back on it, I think I realized that my father wasn't quite a Democrat. And I didn't realize that until I started, really looking into politics myself. And I can say that now because I remember a time where my dad would always go to 7-Eleven, get some candy, coffee, and he would leave the house. But, on the radio, he always played Rush Limbaugh. And so, of course, being a kid, I would get in the car because, of course, I want candy, right? I want to go to 7-Eleven. And so I was in the car and, I would always wonder, why doesn't dad just go in the house afterwards when we got home? He would sit in the driveway and continue to listen to Rush Limbaugh. And it wasn't until I was older, John, when I realized my mom didn't want Rush Limbaugh in the house. And so he would sit in the driveway and listen to Rush Limbaugh. But I didn't really switch to the Republican Party until 2009. I voted for Barack Obama in 2008. Growing up in Southern Maryland, of course, there were a lot of people very excited, especially in the DC bubble, about Barack Obama and the first Black president. I was one of those people. And so we went, stood in line, we voted for him. And I realized after maybe about 6 months or so, I thought he was going to talk more about being this family man, right? From all appearances, he's a great husband, a great father. He values education. I read his book even before I voted for him. And I just noticed that he just kind of had a different mindset and a different tone. And, before you know it, he's talking about Black people being oppressed. You start to see Black Lives Matter for him. You start to see more coming out about Trayvon Martin and that whole story. And it just seemed to me that he was really focused on race. And I thought at that point he'd be more focused on, look at me, I'm a Black man. I overcame so much. And now I'm the president of the United States. And he just did not have that message. So I started to really dig down and I looked at the different parties at that point and I thought, you know what? I think I'm a Republican.
That is fascinating. In many ways, some of the things you've said, I've heard people recently say about Wes Moore.
Oh, wow. See, that's interesting because it's funny. You ever hear him talk about his idol, right? Frederick Douglass. And I think to myself, because he was even Frederick Douglass one year for Halloween. And I was like, wait a minute, his idol is a Republican? And then I did a little digging and I found out that Governor Wes Moore was actually on the college Republicans when he was in school. I don't know if many people know that, but I have his yearbook picture.
When you think about Republicans, and of course, we all have people we follow. I mean, Democrats have certain people that they idolize that are basically their North Star. When you think of Republicans of the past and people you've read about and see, who are your North Stars?
Oh, wow. So Frederick Douglass, first and foremost. I actually have a Democrat on that list, believe it or not, JFK. I got to watch time and time again because it's on YouTube. But remember the debate he had with Nixon back in 1960?
Oh,
His
yes.
opening speech on that debate is my favorite speech of all time. And it's funny because I kind of reworked it the time that I spoke at Mar-a-Lago for Dan Cox when he ran for governor in 2022. I reworked that opening monologue and made it, more geared towards Maryland and Dan Cox. But still, at that moment, at the very end of that speech, I asked everybody in the crowd, John, I said, now, do you know who really originally wrote that speech? And nobody knew, but they assumed it was a Republican. And I said that was John F. Kennedy back in 1960. That's just how crazy the parties have turned since then. But my North Star, I would say Frederick Douglass. Obviously, when you look at some of the writings from Thomas Sowell, I mean, he's one of the top. I do love President Trump. I must admit, I'm a huge Trump fan. And also, believe it or not, even though some Republicans don't agree with me, Congressman Trey Gowdy. And that might be more of a personal story, but Congressman Trey Gowdy is on the top of that list.
It's interesting that you told that JFK story because there was a study done about that first debate. And of course, it got a lot of attention because of Nixon's bad makeup job. But people who heard the debate on radio thought Nixon won the debate. But people who saw it visually, and we get 85% of our knowledge from our site, thought Kennedy had won the debate.
That's interesting. I did not know that. Wow.
Well, as Andre Agassi once said, image is everything.
Yes, that is true. So true.
I talked about Wes Moore a little bit. Where have you been disappointed in Wes Moore as a governor? What would you like to see him do differently?
Honestly, I'd rather him focus a little more at home. I think that he has done a great job at traveling the country. I know he was stumping for Joe Biden when he was in. He then stumped for VP Kamala Harris. I understand he has that look, as we were just talking about the look. He does have that look. People are engaged, when he speaks. Is a very attractive man, and I know many people that have met him and is like, look, he's just so charming. He's got that charisma. And for me, I feel like he's got so much potential. But I feel as though possibly, and I'm just, assuming here based on what I've seen, but it seems to me that he's really focused on the national level and maybe his national ambitions. Here in the state of Maryland, I thought a slam dunk would be the Francis Scott Key Bridge. I really did. I thought that was, something that he could take on. It would be an easy project. Obviously, getting the money wouldn't be so simple, but I thought that he could really do something great there. And when you saw the bridge fall collapse, 2 years ago, you saw it collapse and he was there on the scene. And even though I'm not a huge fan of Governor Moore, I will say the way that he was there every day explaining to the Marylanders what the next steps were to get the bridge out of the water, I thought he did a fantastic job on that, John. So I thought he would continue to go further and make sure that we would see something, a little more tangible at this point. Now, not everything's in his control, obviously, right? Because they've got environmental studies to do and so many other things. But it just feels as though that he kind of abandoned the entire conversation about the Francis Scott Key Bridge. That, and then of course the deficit, the spending has been, really. I'm on WCBM every day, and people call in every single day about the taxes and the fees. And then you look at the electricity bills, and it's just like there's so many things going crazy. But at the same time, not something that we can all blame on Governor Wes Moore, but he's not being a leader in the moment.
If you had to give him advice as far as to do things differently, because I think this is going, I think depending on who the nominee is for Republicans, it has a way of going one way or the other. But if you had to give him some advice and say, here's a couple things you ought to do differently, what would you suggest?
I would say be obviously a bit more present here at home. Maybe not so abrasive when he engages with President Trump or the Trump administration. Not always looking for a way to kind of poke the bear. And I would also say being, possibly a little more present, not just, in his office and in the social media videos, but also in the community. We don't really see Governor Wes Moore a lot. I mean, sometimes you'll see him in Eastern Shore in that area, but you don't see him a whole lot in many of these areas that really got him elected. I don't see him in Baltimore a ton. I don't see him in PG County a ton. I don't see him in Montgomery County a ton. And so maybe he could be a little bit more involved with community activities. If people have questions for him, they can ask him. But right now, John, it almost seems like, he's just it's such a far reach, right? It's not somebody that you can walk up to and have a conversation, which, I really miss in politics in general. And I would say on both sides of the aisle, you see that there's like this barrier between the constituents that got you elected and that political official.
When you talk about the barrier, that's kind of interesting because one of the things that's changed, and you may not have noticed as much as on the Sunday talk shows, and I'm talking about 20 years ago, you used to have a Republican and Democrat at the same table sitting down on the same set. And now it's like we're bringing the Republican on. And then we bring the Democrat on. And I think part of the polarization has occurred if we can't even have two people of different parties sit on the same television set, engage in a conversation of differences.
I did not realize that, but you're right. I mean, we don't see that anymore. And I wish we could get back to a time because I think that's what people want to hear. I mean, if you could sit down and debate your ideas and, back them with common sense and logic, and the people could hear that, I think that would do wonders even for the approval ratings. I mean, think about the approval ratings right now of members of Congress. They're so low on both sides of the aisle. And I think it's because, like you just said, we don't hear, any of those different voices or different opinions, and we don't see the debate.
When you look at Maryland this year, as far as the governor's race, do you have a candidate you'd like to say, I hope this person wins? Do you have a dog in the fight? Would you like it? Where do you see the Republican race currently going as far as preferences or your thoughts in general just about what's going on?
So I have to be honest. I honestly, I wanted Dr. Jeff Wolford to run. I know that he has other obligations with work and everything else that's going on in his life, his family. But if you recall, he was the lieutenant governor pick for Kelly Schultz. I thought that he was phenomenal, fighter pilot, a doctor. Here he's going back to law school. I mean, this guy is, overqualified for the position, but I think really great. But looking at the candidates today, I love the fact that John Myrick is crisscrossing the state. I mean, he's at every event, every community organization. I mean, he's really doing a fantastic job at being everywhere and taking down that barrier that we just talked about. But then also you have Ed Hale Sr., who I'll have to say, when I do polling of my own on WCBM, he's always way out in front. I think people are ready for a businessman. They're ready for somebody that can possibly balance the budget and understand how this all works and possibly run the state like a business. I think right now, when you're looking at Governor Moore, it almost seems like he's running it like a charity or a nonprofit. And I know he was an executive of one, so maybe, that's just how he runs it. But, we need somebody to really take hold of the spending and get us back on track. I mean, you look at the $5 billion surplus Governor Hogan left and none of that is still left. And so it's like, we've got to do something. Something's got to give. But out of those two candidates, I think they're great. As far as Dan Cox, I can say he's a friend of mine, but we already saw this matchup, right? We saw Dan Cox go against Governor Moore. It did not end well. I don't expect his debating skills because I didn't like the way that he debated Governor Wes Moore in 2022. I thought he did a poor job. But I don't think he has brushed up on his debate skills either. So I feel as though it's going to be the same exact results if we were to continue with Dan Cox as a nominee.
I will tend to agree with you on that. My concern about Dan Cox, as far as for Republicans, is he could hurt further ballot people down the road. But at the same time, my concern is I could see him winning the primary if the Democratic Governors Association decides to step in. And at the same time, I know you have met them and I have met them. They're ride or diers. That they are going to vote for Dan Cox because they're absolutely sure Dan Cox will win this time, and they may even believe it was rigged the last time.
Yeah, and that's disheartening, right? Because we know that, we didn't really have any calls of rigging in 2022. And then if you think about it, look at the margins there. I mean, it's just it just really showed. And Dan Cox, like I said, he's a really nice guy. He's got wonderful kids. He's a great father. But this is just not what Maryland is looking for. Maryland is not a very big pro-Trump state. He is very MAGA, and he's made that very known. I think sometimes, John, I think that's why I don't do so well in elections. I think people look at me and see Trump. So, I think we just got to be, use a little more common sense, I think, this time around.
You talked about elections, and you've run a couple races in Maryland. Are you at stage 11 of the 12-stage program and not running again? Or if the right circumstance occurred, do you think you'd get back in the game?
Yeah, so I think right now I've had enough of getting beat up for a little while. I did say, possibly my daughter's 9 years old right now, and it really took a toll on her, mommy being, just gone for so long. I started all this when she was just 4 years old. So I told her I would give her my undivided attention. And so maybe 10 years from now, maybe I'll take a look at what's going on at that point in time. I don't plan to move out of the second district, but who knows? Maybe by then we'll get some redistricting. But for now, I think I'm just fine not running.
I can understand that because I know a lot of people. The number one reason people tell me they don't run is family. That's the number one thing that keeps them out of races.
Yeah, yeah. I think people realize, I talked about this story a little bit, but in 2020, I was married, and it was detrimental. I mean, our marriage wasn't so solid at the time, but not being home and just the whirlwind, President Trump's endorsement, this national profile, all eyes on us. My marriage just didn't last through it, and so that's been tough too for my daughter going through that divorce, and then just so turbulent times. So yes, I tell people all the time, if you run for office and you're married, make sure your spouse is on board 100%, because the last thing you want to do is get into that situation later.
And that's why it's so rough on families. Let me ask you one other thing related to running. People have asked me at times, why don't you run? And I always tell them there's one thing that keeps me out of it. And it's not family, it's not issues, it's not confidence. It's fundraising. I've seen candidates on the phone beg, plead, etc., and fundraise. How difficult did you find it enjoyable? Did you find it, oh my God, I just can't make another phone call? Could someone just please write me a nice big check and we'll figure out the money later? What's your thoughts about the fundraising aspect of running?
Yeah, so I was a bit spoiled, right? So, during the special election in 2019 in District 7, at that point, I had already been doing Fox News hits, right, on the national level. So when I went to go basically launch my campaign back in 2019, I went on Fox News. It was a primetime show. And literally within hours, we had already hit, I think it was close to $40,000. So we just kept doing media hits and getting out there. And so I was spoiled because, there we had raised in a special election close to $250,000. And I didn't make a ton of phone calls at that point. Then you fast forward to August of 2020 when the viral campaign ad hit and we raised $8 million almost overnight. And so, I didn't have that whole get on the phones, but I have friends that run for office that are always on the phone and it looks like a grueling process. So, I think I was very spoiled and very lucky that I didn't have to do that part of it, but it looks horrendous to your point.
My next question centers a little bit on a crystal ball. Where do you see the midterms going? And if it's going to be a problem for Republicans, if you think it is, what needs to be done to right that ship?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know exactly where the midterms are headed. I know that President Trump and his administration, they were just in Miami at Trump Doral, his hotel down there, meeting with some of the candidates and elected officials. And they did tell a lot of the Republicans to stop using the phrase mass deportation. And I think they're very worried that there's going to be a lot of people that just do not like what they've seen from ICE thus far. Obviously, that's why he got rid of Kristi Noem as the head of DHS. I just don't know if Mark Wade Mullen is somebody that's going to be, a little more, I guess, sensitive to the issue. We'll see what happens there. But, if ICE continues to hit the streets and there's a lot of spotlight on ICE, if we deport any Americans, that's going to be a problem. I think what happens in Iran, I have to tell you, John, I was very nervous because there were a lot of Americans saying that they were having a hard time getting home. I thought the State Department needs to get on top of this immediately. The last thing you want is an American to get hurt, because of this Iran war. So, anything could happen from now until November. But I think for the most part, I think we're going to pick up, a couple of seats here and there. But it is still going to be a tough battle. I think, honestly, we're going to be possibly in the same position after November, where we'll still have just a slim majority in both the House and the Senate.
You mentioned as far as the travel situation, I have a friend of mine who was in Dubai for a vacation type of thing, ended up having to get into Oman, and is now, I think he altered his vacation plans because now he's in Sri Lanka.
Oh,
And I
wow.
mean, yeah, so I guess trying to make the best of everything under those circumstances. And my concern about Iran is this: we know what they are as far as Hezbollah, everything. Yes, they're a bad country, just like Iraq with Saddam Hussein. But my issue with Iran, and kind of, we can go back and forth a little on this, is the fact that what happens next? Because we can't, if we install our own leader there, we tried that a long time ago with the Shah. It didn't work.
Right.
We've killed already their top religious leader. That's not going to work long term either. I'm just not sure there's a good way of getting out of this situation because we may have angered too many people.
Yeah, so it is very hard to tell where we are with this. I don't know. I know Pete Hegseth recently said there will be no nation building, but here we are at a regime change, and they told us there would be no regime change, right? So, a lot of mixed messaging there, but at the same time, I don't know if Israel does more on the nation building point of it, but I will say, John, if they decide to do nation building, you are going to lose so many Republicans, and then we will bomb the midterms because I know that a lot of people are upset that we're in Iran on the right. A lot of people said, look, he said no new wars, no forever wars, whatever he said. They just feel like we were not going to be in this position. And I'm talking specifically Tucker Carlson and so many people that support him and that kind of, very right side of the party. So, I don't know exactly how they're going to handle this. I do have a lot of faith in Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Believe it or not, he's my pick for 2028. But what they plan to do in this moment, your guess is as good as mine.
My concern about what they're doing in the moment is it's day by day. It's like we got a plan on Monday,
Yeah.
and I was surprised this weekend when Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, made a comment about bringing back the draft, and it hasn't even gotten like a oh my god yet. I was expecting Monday a let's reel that statement back. That was kind of a
Yeah.
little bit of like no one reacting and no one saying reel that back because yeah, if you need a hell of a lot of troops then. And the fact that you're raising the issue of a draft, I find a little bit troublesome, and I think that would really turn off voters.
Oh no, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you would see just such a drop off from the right. I mean, right now, to be honest with you, John, heading even to 2028, I don't know how the Republican Party keeps a hold of the minority voters that they had in 2024. You do something like that where you put boots on the ground in Iran and it is a full-on war or nation building, you're going to lose voters. And so, yes, I saw Caroline Leavitt made those statements and I thought, you know what? There's going to be so many people upset with it. And I was surprised too that Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly didn't run with that clip, but they didn't.
Last thing I'll ask you about and talk about a little bit is Nancy Mace in this regard. Last week, she made a resolution proposal, basically all this money that has been set aside that's gone back 30 years of making payments for sexual assault, harassment, etc., to staffers and other people. And she basically said, let's get the names out there. And it was voted down. And the thing that kind of irritates me is all these people yelling, release the Epstein files, release the Epstein files. Let's get it all out there. And yet many of these people said, yeah, release the Epstein files, but they wouldn't release this information. And it seemed like they were going on a lot of semantics regarding this instead of saying, this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, it was very confusing. And I also saw a lot of, I call them like the rookies, right? Those that just got to the Hill. I thought they have nothing to lose. And some of them even voted against releasing that information. The only thing I could think, and I was thinking about it, myself, is the fact that there might be some people there on that list that is, the court, maybe the king of the big donors on either side of the aisle. But I was shocked to see that. And you're right. I mean, if you're going to talk about the Epstein files and you're going to ignore the fact that there could be possibly predators right there on Capitol Hill today, I mean, it really flies in the face and it's, hypocritical of all those that are talking about the Epstein files. But yeah, not a whole lot of people say much about it. But you know what? We saw this before. If you remember the late Congresswoman Mia Love out of Utah, remember she tried to get the same thing opened up. And she got a lot of backlash, and before we knew it, she was out of Congress altogether. So I thought that was interesting when she did it, and then all of a sudden she didn't win her reelection bid.
I thought she was a really good leader in Congress for the time she was there. And, my view on the whole Epstein thing is just release everything. If Bill Clinton and President Trump go down, so be it. They should. And,
Yeah.
because these are predators. And I always remind people, never refer to the victims as women. They're girls. You are not
Oh,
a
yeah.
woman at age 14. You are a girl. And
Yeah.
I feel that it's something that I think part of it is, and I thought you made a great point, and I never thought about it till you actually said it. You used the word donors. And I thought about that in the respect of, yeah, if we go after too many of these people, maybe the fear, politicians know certain things and they look the other way sometimes. Yeah, this guy's creepy, but this check cleared. And I
Yeah.
think that maybe the reason there's been part of the delay on both parties, it's not as much the names, but it's the names and the donors and fundraising and things like that. All of a sudden, these people go down, and what happens is the first thing you do, just like when they released one of the names, and Steve Tisch came out, who is a co-owner of the Giants. So the first thing people said is he's got to sell his interests, and people are going to look. If there's a lot of multimillionaires and a lot of people we have suspicions who they are, they're going to look and say, you know, so and so got X amount of money from someone on the Epstein files. Vote for me instead. I'm not taking that money.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I thought about. And like you said, I think it's on both sides of the aisle. And that's why you're in this position. And, whether it's the slush fund book, whether it's Epstein files, I think that it is one big behind the scenes terrible situation that you and I will probably never know about, John.
And that's the unfortunate thing, because it seems like there's always a little bit of a roadblock or something that's stopping this thing. And I think it's a situation the Band-Aid should have been ripped off a long time ago. But I think for both political parties, as you said, the magic word donors, I think that's what's held a lot of this back. And it is the rich and powerful. And I think that would really upset the MAGA base and upset a lot of other bases too, because it'd be like, as I said, people are going to do the Google search immediately. Who did these rich and powerful people give money to? And the accusation is going to be, well, now we know why you opposed at one time releasing these things.
Yeah, well, and I would also know because I thought about this before. I mean, the apparently the information sitting at the Department of Treasury. I mean, I wonder if the head of the Treasury could possibly release some of the information. I don't know if that's a possibility, but I mean, I would love to see somebody at least, take the reins on this. But I didn't think that Congresswoman Nancy Mace was going to get much traction. And as you know, John, she waited until, she's not running for re-election to really hone in on this.
She's very good at getting a lot of publicity for Nancy Mace. As far
Yes.
as pelts on the wall, there's not a lot of pelts, but boy, there's a lot of noise on the wall.
Yes, yes. Congresswoman Nancy Mace, she's actually a lot of fun. She is, and she's a firecracker. But it's for me, I guess if I were ever in Congress, I would want to be somewhat of a more serious, maybe not as loud and boisterous, but somebody that really just kind of gets the work done and listens to the constituents. And sometimes it doesn't always happen. I say you got workhorses and show ponies
Yep.
usually, and in politics.
That's the way it goes. I grew up in New York State. Al D'Amato was the workhorse, but I wouldn't call Moynihan a show pony, but he was the one who basically would sit in the office and think of great national ideas. And I think you always have to have that balance there. The one senator
Yeah.
who's plowing through everything, and the other who maybe is just sitting in the room thinking of great policy proposals.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like today on my show, I had Congressman Burgess Owens on. He's a workhorse, right? He gets the stuff done. And then, like you said, Nancy Mace, she's more of a show pony. She's out there. She's like in your face, making all the news and the headlines. And you're right, they have it on both sides, and it kind of balances each other.
Want to thank you again for taking the time to talk with me today, and I wish you much success in your career endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a lot of fun.
You're welcome.